Hello, my name is Andrew Martin, and I'm a senior at Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm making this video for a course in my major, ICS 382 Computer Security. As a student, this video was created for an educational demonstration, and I'm not liable for any damage or data loss caused using security techniques discussed in this video. First, I will be talking about IoT device security and some of the associated security protocols. I will also talk about some of the failings, vulnerabilities, or complete lack of default security present in IoT devices, and some of the privacy and security breaches discovered during the rise of IoT devices. I will also be discussing the issue of IoT devices collecting data, both with consumer consent and without their knowledge. As part of this discussion on IoT device data security and privacy, I will also open the dialogue for who should ultimately be responsible for the protection of privacy and personal data in regards to IoT devices, as well as some of the ways a consumer can secure their IoT devices. Lastly, I will also discuss one of the major pitfalls that has appeared out of the lack of IoT device security in regards to the Mirai botnet. I will go over the creation and history of the Mirai botnet and some of the botnet's notable attacks. First, an overview of IoT devices. The largely accepted definition of the Internet of Things, or IoT, is the interconnection via the Internet of computing devices embedded into everyday devices, which can then send and receive data. Almost any everyday device that can connect to the Internet can be considered an IoT device. Some readily notable devices that have been available for a while include smartphones, smartwatches, and smart TVs. More recently, the rise of interconnected household devices such as thermostats, baby monitors, surveillance cameras, door locks, DVRs, fridges, and even light bulbs and light switches have rapidly expanded the market for connected devices. The next topic I will discuss in this video is the large amount of data collection that is being done by IoT devices. To function as a smart device, IoT devices must gather data through a variety of sensors and means. Alexa, Siri, and other forms of voice command and control gather data as they are used and send that data off for analysis as part of their usage. The privacy concern with these devices comes into play with the always listening features that many of these devices have. Because they are always listening and waiting to hear commands, they are constantly picking up and analyzing data that a consumer may not intend for nor want the device to gather. A greater privacy concern comes from devices that a consumer may expect to stop listening when they are turned off, such as smart TVs. In documents released by WikiLeaks, it was found that certain Samsung televisions had a vulnerability where they would appear to be off, but actually be eavesdropping in the background. An example of a privacy breach that ties back to the insecurity of IoT devices is a story out of Washington in late 2016, when a couple discovered that their two-way baby monitor had been hacked and a third party was controlling the device's camera as well as speaking to their child through the monitor's intercom. Another privacy concern with IoT device data collection is geolocation data. With GPS connectivity in everything from cars to smartwatches to cell phones, a massive amount of location data on millions of users is being collected every day. In many cases, consumers accept this collection because of the convenience it provides. But at the end of the day, that data is still being collected, and consumers should be cognizant of that. Plainly, IoT devices are connected to the internet and collect user data and thus need to be protected. While many of these devices are revolutionary and provide increased convenience for everyday tasks, there are some rather large security risks that have appeared in the wake of their adoption. In a study done by HP in 2014, it was estimated that almost 70% of the popular IoT devices were plagued with security vulnerabilities. Some of the vulnerabilities that fell under this net were at the fault of the user, mainly a failure to set and enforce strong credentials, and in many cases failing to change credentials away from the default credentials. But some of the vulnerabilities were more severe, with the study showing that many of the devices failed to properly encrypt network traffic, as well as many manufacturers failing to ensure that updates can be downloaded and installed securely, posing the risk of a man-in-the-middle attack. Furthermore, in many cases, devices failed to manage sessions properly, exposing them to prolonged attacks and furthering the risk of breach. With the rapid expansion in IoT smart devices, it poses the important question: whose responsibility is it to protect a consumer's data and privacy? Does any responsibility lie with the manufacturer, or does it all land solely on the consumer purchasing and using a smart device? Overall, I would say it's a little bit of both. I think that manufacturers have a responsibility to their consumer to provide adequate security protocols on their devices during creation and distribution, as well as providing patches to any closed-source software and firmware that contain known vulnerabilities. I also think the manufacturer has a duty to protect any sensitive data that may be connected and collected with these devices, such as payment accounts. But generally, payment data will fall under PCI compliance. Any responsibility further than that, I think, falls to the consumer when they choose to purchase and use a smart device. In the next section, I will go over some of the steps that a consumer can take to protect themselves and their data. With all the potential privacy issues that can arise from the use of IoT devices, it is important to be proactive in securing your devices and your data. Here are a couple of steps that can be used to protect IoT devices and the gathered data. 1. Always change the device's factory username and passwords. Default usernames and passwords are often readily available with a little searching on the internet, and an IoT device connected to the internet that is left in its default configuration leaves the consumer vulnerable to external threats. 2. Make sure that IoT devices are updated to the latest software and firmware. Many times, when vulnerabilities are discovered, manufacturers will release software and/or firmware updates to combat these vulnerabilities. By keeping devices updated, a consumer can largely mitigate the risk of known vulnerabilities. Unfortunately, this can sometimes be difficult due to a lack of publication regarding updates and patches, or even a lack of updates completely. 3. Don't give permissions for important accounts to your IoT devices. By connecting important accounts and services to IoT devices, the consumer leaves those accounts vulnerable to not only the device, but to a threat actor that may be able to take control of the device. A less sinister example of this comes out of San Diego, when a news report talking about Alexa used an Alexa key phrase that prompted viewers' Alexa-compatible devices to order products off of Amazon. 4. Another way for consumers to protect themselves is to isolate IoT devices onto a separate network. Simply isolating IoT devices onto a guest network serves more to protect the consumer's other more important devices and data than to protect the IoT devices themselves. In the event of a breach, compromised devices would only be able to locate and possibly infect the other IoT devices on that isolated network. This separate network could also be configured so that its devices can't discover each other at all, further providing protection for IoT devices from one another. While these are all good steps a user can take to protect the security of their devices, they don't necessarily protect the user's data from unwanted collection by IoT devices. Here are a couple of tips for a user who wants to mitigate any unwanted data collection. If a device with listening capabilities has a mute or stop listening feature, take advantage of that feature when the device is not in use. While this may not completely prevent data collection, it is the most straightforward method. 2. To protect against collection of geolocation data from smart devices such as smartphones and smartwatches, individually setting permissions at the app level gives the user some control over the data that is being collected, both when in use and otherwise. While I can't specifically speak to Android, Apple iOS allows users to set what apps are allowed to use location data at all, as well as restrict them to using the data only when the app is active. If this option is selected, it is important to remember to close out of the app when it is not in use, not to simply minimize it to return to the home screen. If in doubt about whether a smart device is collecting data while it is off, power can be cut to the device if it is not being currently used or needed. In the last section of this video, I will discuss one of the issues that has arisen from improperly securing IoT devices. One of the largest botnets ever discovered, the Mirai botnet. Discovered in late 2016, the Mirai botnet is comprised of devices that have been infected with the Mirai malware. Focusing on any network device that runs Linux, The Mirai botnet has used the devices it gathers to further spread to other IoT devices, as well as commit large-scale DDoS attacks. The source code for Mirai was also largely distributed, leading to its adaptation and use in other malware projects. Once a device has been infected with the Mirai malware, it starts to scan the internet for available IoT devices. Controlled by a central command and control server, once the botnet discovers an IoT device, it then checks for vulnerabilities by using a list of common default credentials. If access to the IoT device is gained, the compromised device will promptly be infected with the Mirai malware and join the ranks of the botnet. An interesting part of the Mirai malware is that it contained a list of IP addresses that should not be scanned in the recruitment process. These addresses mostly belonged to the US Department of Defense, the US Postal Service, and other United States federal agencies. The most likely reason for this list was an attempt to avoid the detection of the botnet for as long as possible, an attempt that would have quickly failed by scanning and attempting to breach hardened government networks. Next, we will go over the basics of a DDoS attack. For those that are new to the premise of a DDoS attack, it stands for Distributed Denial of Service Attack. The premise behind this attack is for several devices to flood a system or a service with a large amount of illegitimate traffic. When the system is unable to accommodate such a large influx of traffic all at once, the system will go down and become inaccessible. The benefit of a distributed denial of service attack over a DOS attack, or denial of service attack, is the large variation in IP addresses the traffic is coming from, as many services will attempt to block a single IP if too much traffic begins to flood it from one source. Since its inception and discovery, the Mirai botnet has been a part of a few notable DDoS attacks. One of the first major attacks by the Mirai botnet was against the security blog Krebs on Security, run by security researcher Brian Krebs. Beginning on September 20th, 2016, the botnet produced more than 600 gigabits per second of attack traffic against the site, but failed in taking the site offline largely due to the cloud security company that protects the blog. 1 month later, in October of 2016, a larger successful attack against the DNS provider DIN succeeded in bringing down the provider, taking down many popular sites such as Reddit, Twitter, Netflix, and The Guardian News for most of a day. Spoofing TCP and UDP traffic, the DIN attack was found to have come from almost 100,000 distinct malicious endpoints. Following those two high-profile attacks, a new strain of the botnet appeared in January of 2017 to launch a 54-hour DDoS attack against an unnamed university in the United States. During this attack, and coming from addresses in over 10 countries, the attack generated over 2.8 billion requests. To recap, in this video, we discussed the rise of interconnectivity and IoT devices in everyday life, as well as the security flaws and vulnerabilities present in some of these Internet of Things devices. We also talked about the mass data collection by IoT devices that is inherently present as part of their use. We also discussed some strategies that a consumer can take to increase the security around their connected devices, as well as some of the steps that can be taken to mitigate unwanted data collection. And finally, we discussed one of the major consequences of inadequate device security, the Mirai botnet, what comprises a distributed denial of service attack, and some of the notable attacks committed by the Mirai botnet. I hope that you found this video informative and that it inspires you to take a proactive stance on security in regards to your IoT devices and your personal data. Thank you.